King Edmund III sat in his private study, staring at the portrait of his late wife, Queen Isabella, that hung above the marble fireplace. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did on this gray October morning in the kingdom of Astoria. 25 years had passed since Isabella's tragic death in a riding accident, and 15 years since he had quietly married Lady Catherine Pemberton in a private ceremony that had shocked the royal court and divided the nation. The morning newspapers lay scattered across his mahogany desk, each one carrying headlines that made his stomach churn. "Royal marriage under investigation," screamed the Astorian Chronicle. "Questions raised about Queen Catherine's past," declared the Royal Gazette. The stories were becoming more frequent, more detailed, and more damaging to the crown's reputation with each passing day. Edmund rubbed his tired eyes and reached for the secure telephone that connected him directly to his private secretary, Lord William Ashworth. Within minutes, the distinguished gentleman with silver hair and wire-rimmed spectacles knocked softly on the study door before entering with a stack of official documents and a grave expression that Edmund had come to recognize all too well. "Your Majesty," Lord Ashworth began, his voice carrying the weight of years of loyal service to the crown, "I am afraid we have received some rather disturbing information from our intelligence services. The investigation into Queen Catherine's background has uncovered several inconsistencies in her official biographical records that were submitted at the time of your engagement." Edmund felt his heart sink as he gestured for his trusted advisor to take a seat in the leather chair across from his desk. The king had always prided himself on making decisions based on careful consideration and thorough investigation, but his marriage to Catherine had been different. It had been a decision of the heart, made during a period when he was still grieving Isabella's loss and seeking comfort in Catherine's warm companionship and understanding nature. Lady Catherine Pemberton had entered his life during a charity gala for veterans of the Astorian military conflicts. She had been working as a coordinator for various charitable organizations, and her passion for helping others had impressed Edmund immediately. Her beauty was undeniable, with auburn hair that caught the light and green eyes that seemed to hold depths of compassion and intelligence. More importantly, she had treated him as Edmund the man rather than Edmund the king, something he had rarely experienced since ascending to the throne 30 years earlier. "What kind of inconsistencies are we discussing, William?" Edmund asked, though he dreaded the answer. He had learned over the years that when Lord Ashworth used such carefully chosen words, the reality was often far worse than the gentle language suggested. Lord Ashworth opened the first file and spread several documents across the desk. "The investigation has revealed that Lady Catherine's educational credentials from the Swiss finishing school she claimed to have attended cannot be verified. The school has no record of her enrollment during the years she specified. Additionally, her claimed employment history with several international charitable organizations appears to have been fabricated or significantly exaggerated." The king felt as though the room was spinning slightly as he absorbed this information. Catherine had spoken often of her time in Switzerland, sharing detailed stories about her studies and the friendships she had formed there. She had also frequently referenced her previous work with various charitable foundations, using those experiences to inform her current royal duties and patronages. "There's more, Your Majesty," Lord Ashworth continued, his voice becoming even more somber. "Our investigators have discovered that prior to her appearance in Astorian high society, 5 years before your marriage, there is virtually no verifiable record of Lady Catherine's existence. No birth certificate has been located in any of the registry offices she claimed as her place of birth. No school records from her supposed childhood education. It's as if she simply appeared in our social circles with a completely fabricated background." Edmund stood abruptly and walked to the tall windows that overlooked the royal gardens. The autumn leaves were falling steadily, creating a carpet of gold and crimson that normally would have lifted his spirits. Instead, he felt only a growing sense of dread and betrayal. He thought about Catherine, who was currently upstairs in their private apartments, probably preparing for her afternoon engagement with the Children's Hospital Foundation, one of her most cherished patronages. "Have you discovered her real identity?" Edmund asked without turning from the window. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. "We believe so, Your Majesty. The fingerprint analysis that was conducted during the routine security update last month has been matched to records from Moldavia. According to those records, the woman we know as Catherine Pemberton was born Elena Vasquez in a small village outside the Moldavian capital. She was arrested twice in her early 20s for involvement in confidence schemes targeting wealthy individuals in resort towns across Eastern Europe. Edmund could hear his own heartbeat and the distant sound of gardeners working in the courtyard below. Everything he thought he knew about his wife, everything he had based his decision to remarry upon, was crumbling before his eyes. The woman who shared his bed, who had been crowned Queen of Astoria in a ceremony watched by millions around the world, who had represented the crown at countless state functions and diplomatic events, was apparently a complete fiction. There's additional information, Your Majesty, regarding her activities during the period immediately before she entered Astorian society, Lord Ashworth said softly. The intelligence services have reason to believe that her appearance in our country was not coincidental, but rather part of a carefully orchestrated plan. They suspect she may have been working with individuals who had ulterior motives regarding access to the royal family and state secrets. Edmund finally turned from the window, his face pale and drawn. The implications of what Lord Ashworth was telling him were staggering. Not only had he been personally deceived and betrayed, but he had potentially compromised the security of the entire kingdom by bringing an unknown quantity into the very heart of the royal establishment. What are you suggesting, William? That Catherine is some kind of spy or intelligence operative? The words felt ridiculous as he spoke them, but the expression on Lord Ashworth's face told him that this was exactly what was being suggested. The pattern of her activities since becoming queen has raised red flags with our security services, Your Majesty. Her frequent private meetings with individuals from various foreign embassies, her requests for access to certain classified briefing materials, her interest in specific state documents and royal correspondence. When viewed individually, these activities could be explained as the natural curiosity and diligence of a new queen learning her role. When viewed as a pattern, however, they paint a more concerning picture. The king sank back into his chair, feeling suddenly much older than his 68 years. He thought about all the state secrets Catherine had been privy to as his wife and queen, all the diplomatic conversations she had overheard, all the classified information that would have been accessible to her through her position. If she was indeed working for foreign interests, the damage to Astoria's national security could be immeasurable. What do our intelligence services recommend? Edmund asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. They are recommending immediate but discreet action, Your Majesty. The longer this situation continues, the greater the potential damage to the crown and to national security. They suggest that Queen Catherine be confronted with the evidence and given the opportunity to explain herself before any public announcements are made. Edmund nodded slowly, understanding that his world was about to change dramatically once again. He had survived the devastating loss of Isabella, the challenges of raising their 2 children as a widowed father and reigning monarch, and the political upheavals that had marked his reign. Now he faced perhaps the greatest crisis of his rule, a personal betrayal that had profound implications for the monarchy and the nation. Schedule a private meeting with Catherine for this evening, he instructed Lord Ashworth. And ensure that our security teams are prepared for any eventuality. If what you suspect is true, we have no way of knowing how she might react when confronted with the evidence. As Lord Ashworth gathered the documents and prepared to leave, Edmund remained seated at his desk, staring once again at the portrait of Isabella. He wondered what she would have thought of Catherine, whether she would have seen through the deception that had fooled him so completely. He wondered how he would explain this situation to his children, Prince Alexander and Princess Victoria, who had grown fond of their stepmother despite their initial reservations about their father's remarriage. The private dining room in the royal residence had been Edmund's preferred location for difficult family conversations throughout his reign. The intimate space, with its warm wood paneling and portraits of previous monarchs, seemed appropriate for what would undoubtedly be the most challenging discussion of his marriage. As evening approached, Edmund found himself pacing nervously between the fireplace and the tall windows, rehearsing various ways to begin a conversation that could destroy everything he thought he knew about his life. Catherine entered the room precisely at 8 o'clock, as was her custom. She wore a simple but elegant navy dress that complemented her auburn hair, which she had styled in the understated manner that had become her signature look as queen. Her smile was warm and genuine as she approached to give Edmund their customary greeting kiss, and for a moment he almost lost his resolve. This was the woman who had comforted him through his worst moments of grief, who had stood beside him at countless state functions, who had become beloved by the Astorian people for her charitable work and genuine warmth. "You look troubled, my darling," Catherine said, her green eyes showing concern as she studied his face. "Lord Ashworth mentioned that you wanted to speak with me about something important. Is everything all right with the children? I know Victoria has been struggling with the pressures of university life." Edmund guided her to one of the comfortable armchairs near the fireplace, taking the seat across from her, rather than his usual spot beside her on the sofa. This small change in their routine did not go unnoticed, and he saw a flicker of wariness cross her features before she composed herself. "Catherine," he began, his voice carefully controlled, "I need to ask you some questions about your background. Some inconsistencies have come to light during a routine security review, and I need you to help me understand what might have caused these discrepancies." He watched her face carefully as he spoke, looking for any sign of recognition or guilt. Catherine's expression remained politely curious, though he noticed her hands had clasped together more tightly in her lap. "Of course, Edmund. What kind of inconsistencies? I'm happy to clarify anything that might be unclear in my official records." Her voice was steady, but Edmund detected a subtle tension that hadn't been there moments before. "Let's start with your education in Switzerland," Edmund said, retrieving the file that Lord Ashworth had prepared for him. "The finishing school you attended, Institut Belle Époque in Geneva. Our investigators contacted them to verify your attendance during the years 1998 to 2000, but they have no record of you being enrolled there." Catherine was quiet for several long moments, her eyes focused on the fire rather than meeting Edmund's gaze. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, more hesitant than her usual confident tone. "Edmund, there are things about my past that I haven't shared with you, not because I intended to deceive you, but because they were painful, and I didn't think they were relevant to our life together." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "The truth is that my family's financial situation deteriorated dramatically when I was in my late teens. My father's business failed, and we lost everything. I couldn't afford to attend the school I had been accepted to, so I spent those years working various jobs while trying to continue my education independently." Edmund felt a flicker of hope that there might be an innocent explanation for the discrepancies, but he knew he needed to press further. "What about your charitable work with the International Children's Foundation and the European Cultural Heritage Society? Both organizations have stated that they have no records of your employment with them." This time, Catherine's composure cracked slightly. He saw her swallow hard before responding, and when she looked up at him, there were tears in her eyes. "Edmund, I'm so sorry. I exaggerated my involvement with those organizations because I was ashamed of the truth. After my family lost everything, I struggled to find legitimate work. I did volunteer with various charities, but I was never formally employed by them. I was so afraid that you wouldn't think I was worthy of your attention if you knew how humble my background really was." The explanation seemed plausible, and Edmund wanted desperately to believe it. But Lord Ashworth's words echoed in his mind, and he knew he had to continue with the more serious allegations. He reached for another file, this one containing the information about her true identity and background. "Catherine," he said gently, "I need you to be completely honest with me now. Our security services believe that your real name is Elena Vasquez, and that you were born in Moldavia, not in England as you've claimed. They have fingerprint evidence that matches records from the Moldavian authorities." The change in Catherine's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The warm, concerned expression disappeared completely, replaced by something much colder and more calculating. She sat back in her chair, studying Edmund with an intensity that made him profoundly uncomfortable. For the first time since he had known her, he felt as though he was looking at a complete stranger. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice now devoid of emotion. The cultured English accent that had been part of her charm had shifted slightly, revealing hints of an Eastern European inflection that Edmund had never noticed before. "The investigation has been ongoing for several weeks," Edmund replied, working to keep his own voice steady. "Catherine, or Elena, I need you to explain what's happening here. Who are you, really, and why did you deceive me?" She stood abruptly and walked to the window, her silhouette dark against the evening sky. When she turned back to face him, her expression was a mixture of defiance and something that might have been regret. "You want the truth, Edmund?" The truth is that I am Elena Vasquez. And yes, I was born in Moldavia. But everything I told you about my feelings for you, about our relationship, about the love I have for you and your children, all of that was real. That was never part of the deception. But there was a deception, Edmund said, standing to face her. You created an entirely false identity to gain access to me and to the royal family. Why? What did you hope to accomplish? Elena walked back toward him, her movements more graceful and controlled than he remembered Catherine ever being. It was as if she had been wearing a mask for the past 5 years, and now that it had been removed, her true nature was emerging. When I was 25, I was approached by individuals who offered me a substantial sum of money to gather information about the Astorian royal family and government, she said with startling directness. My family was in desperate poverty, and my younger brother needed expensive medical treatment that we couldn't afford. I was told that the information they wanted was relatively harmless. Social connections, personal preferences, details about security arrangements for public events. Edmund felt the blood drain from his face as the full implications of her words hit him. You're telling me that you married me as part of an espionage operation? Initially, yes, Elena replied without hesitation. The plan was to establish myself in Astorian high society, gather the requested information, and then disappear after a year or two with a new identity and enough money to take care of my family. I never expected to actually meet you, let alone fall in love with you. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire and the sound of Edmund's labored breathing. He felt as though the ground beneath his feet had completely disappeared, leaving him falling through space with nothing solid to grasp. The woman he had married, the woman he had trusted with state secrets and personal confidences, the woman who had been crowned Queen of Astoria, had been working for foreign intelligence services from the very beginning. Fall in love? He repeated, his voice hollow. You expect me to believe that while you were systematically betraying me and my country, you somehow developed genuine feelings? Elena's composure finally broke, and tears began streaming down her face. Edmund, I know how impossible this must sound, but I swear to you that my feelings became real. When we first met at that charity event, I was there as part of my assignment. I was supposed to find a way to get close to you or your children. But when we started talking, when I saw the pain you were still carrying from Isabella's death, when I realized what a good and decent man you were despite all the power you wielded, everything changed for me. She moved closer to him, her hands reaching out as if to touch his face, but Edmund stepped backward, unable to bear any physical contact with her in that moment. I tried to withdraw from the assignment, she continued, her voice breaking. I told my handlers that I wanted out, that I couldn't continue with the deception, but they reminded me that they had evidence of my previous activities, and they threatened to expose me if I didn't continue. By then, I was already in too deep, and I was terrified of losing you. Edmund walked to his desk and picked up another file, this one containing details about the classified information that Elena had potentially accessed during their marriage. What did you pass along to your handlers? What state secrets did you compromise? Elena wiped her eyes and seemed to compose herself slightly before answering. In the early days, I provided some information about your personal schedule and security arrangements for public events. I also shared details about your relationships with other world leaders and your private opinions about various international situations. But Edmund, I swear to you that I never passed along anything that I believed would truly compromise national security or put anyone in danger. That's not your decision to make. Edmund's voice rose for the first time during their conversation, years of suppressed royal restraint finally giving way to raw emotion. You don't get to decide what information is harmless and what might endanger this country or its people. You systematically violated every oath you took when you became my wife and this nation's queen. Elena flinched at his outburst but didn't back down. You're right, Edmund. I betrayed your trust and my oath to this country. But I want you to know that I stopped providing information to my handlers over 2 years ago. I told them I no longer had access to useful intelligence, and eventually they stopped contacting me. How do I know that's true? Edmund demanded. How do I know anything you're telling me is true when your entire existence in my life has been built on lies? Part 3. The revelation that his wife had been living a lie shattered more than just Edmund's personal world. It threatened the very foundation of the Astorian monarchy itself. Over the next several days, as security services conducted a thorough investigation into Elena's activities and contacts, Edmund found himself grappling with decisions that would affect not only his own life, but the future of the crown and the stability of the nation. Lord Ashworth had been working around the clock with intelligence officials, legal advisors, and senior members of the royal household to determine the full extent of the damage and to develop a strategy for managing what was rapidly becoming the greatest crisis in modern Asturian royal history. The secure conference room in the basement of the royal residence had become a nerve center of activity, with experts analyzing every piece of communication Elena had made during her time as queen and every state function she had attended. "Your Majesty," Lord Ashworth reported during one of their daily briefings, "the security services have completed their preliminary assessment of the potential intelligence compromise. While the situation is certainly serious, their initial findings suggest that the damage may be somewhat less extensive than we initially feared." Edmund, who had barely slept in 3 days, looked up from the reports he had been studying. "Explain what you mean by less extensive, William. Any compromise of state secrets is unacceptable." "Of course, Your Majesty. What I mean is that our investigators believe Elena's claims about reducing her cooperation with foreign handlers appear to be accurate. Electronic surveillance of her communications over the past 2 years shows no evidence of ongoing intelligence activities. Additionally, most of the classified information she had access to was already known to foreign intelligence services through other channels." This news provided little comfort to Edmund, who was struggling with the personal betrayal as much as the security implications. He had spent the past 3 nights alone in his study, unable to bear the thought of sleeping in the bedroom he had shared with Elena. She had been moved to a secure guest quarters under discreet guard while the investigation continued, and he had not seen her since their confrontational dinner conversation. "What about her claims regarding her motivations and her family situation?" Edmund asked. "Have we been able to verify any of that?" Lord Ashworth consulted his notes before responding. "Our investigators have confirmed that Elena Vasquez does indeed have family in Moldavia, including a younger brother who required expensive medical treatment around the time she would have been recruited. Her father did experience significant financial difficulties during that period. However, the intelligence services believe her recruitment was more sophisticated than she described, and that her handlers may have specifically targeted her because of her intelligence, language skills, and physical resemblance to the type of woman who would appeal to you." The implication that Elena had been selected and trained specifically to seduce him added another layer of humiliation to Edmund's already overwhelming sense of betrayal. He thought about all their intimate moments together, all the conversations they had shared, all the times he had confided in her about his fears and hopes for the kingdom. Had any of it been genuine, or had it all been performance? "Sir, we need to discuss the public relations aspect of this situation," Lord Ashworth continued carefully. "Word of the investigation has begun to leak to certain members of the press, and we estimate that we have perhaps 48 to 72 hours before the story becomes public knowledge. We need to decide how to handle the announcement and what steps to take regarding the Queen's status." Edmund had been dreading this conversation, but knew it was inevitable. The marriage would have to be annulled, and Elena would need to be stripped of her royal title and privileges. The challenge was managing this process in a way that preserved public confidence in the monarchy and minimized damage to Asturia's international standing. "Have you prepared recommendations for the announcement?" Edmund asked. "Yes, Your Majesty. The communications team has developed several approaches, ranging from a brief statement acknowledging the end of the marriage due to irreconcilable personal differences to a more detailed explanation of the security concerns that necessitated the Queen's removal. Each approach has different implications for public perception and for Elena's future safety." The mention of Elena's safety caught Edmund's attention. Despite his anger and sense of betrayal, he found that he was still concerned about her welfare. "What kind of safety concerns are we discussing?" If it becomes public knowledge that she was involved in intelligence gathering, Elena could become a target for various hostile actors who might want to silence her or use her for their own purposes. Additionally, there could be significant public anger directed toward her personally if the full extent of her deception becomes known. Edmund stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where he and Elena had walked together countless times during their marriage. He remembered her enthusiasm for the rose garden, her delight in feeding the swans on the small lake, her genuine pleasure in hosting garden parties for various charitable organizations. Had any of those moments been real, or had they all been calculated performances? "I want to speak with her again," Edmund announced suddenly. "Before we make any final decisions about how to proceed, I need to understand more about what really happened during our marriage. I need to know if there was any truth in our relationship at all." Lord Ashworth looked uncomfortable with this request. "Your Majesty, the security services have advised against any further direct contact with Elena until the investigation is complete. They're concerned that she might try to manipulate you, or that additional conversations could compromise the intelligence assessment." "William," Edmund said firmly, turning back to face his longtime advisor, "I have been manipulated and deceived for 5 years. I think I can handle one more conversation with appropriate security precautions in place. I need this for my own peace of mind before I make decisions that will affect the rest of my life and the future of this monarchy." Several hours later, Edmund found himself once again in the private dining room. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Security personnel were stationed discreetly outside, and the conversation was being recorded for official purposes. Elena entered wearing simple civilian clothes rather than the elegant attire he was accustomed to seeing her in, and her face showed the strain of the past few days. "Edmund," she said softly as she took the chair across from him, "thank you for agreeing to see me. I know you have every right to never speak to me again." "I need to understand something," Edmund said without preamble. "During our marriage, were there any moments that were genuine? Any conversations or experiences that weren't part of your assignment or performance?" Elena was quiet for a long time, her eyes fixed on her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up at him, her expression was raw with emotion. "Edmund, I know this will sound impossible to believe, but almost everything between us was genuine once we actually got to know each other. Yes, I approached you initially as part of an assignment, and yes, I created a false background to make myself seem more suitable for your attention. But from our 3rd or 4th meeting onward, every conversation we had, every moment of intimacy we shared, every laugh and every tear, all of that was real. How can you expect me to believe that when your entire identity was a fabrication?" Edmund asked, though his voice lacked the anger it had carried in their previous conversation. "Because you knew me, Edmund. You knew the real me, even though you didn't know my real name or background. When I was with you, I wasn't pretending to be someone else. I was being myself for the first time in years. The person who fell in love with you, who worried about your health when you worked too late, who cried when you talked about missing Isabella, who was so proud to stand beside you at state functions, that was Elena, not some character I was playing." Edmund studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. The woman sitting across from him looked exhausted and defeated, but there was something in her eyes that reminded him of the Catherine he had fallen in love with.
"If your feelings were genuine, why didn't you tell me the truth?"
"Why didn't you trust me enough to come clean about your background and ask for my help in dealing with your handlers?" Elena's eyes filled with tears as she responded. "Because I was terrified of losing you, and I was ashamed of what I had done. By the time I realized how much I loved you, I was in so deep with the deception that I didn't see any way out. I convinced myself that if I just stopped providing information and gradually distanced myself from my handlers, I could protect both you and our marriage without having to confess everything." "But that decision wasn't yours to make alone," Edmund said. "By keeping the truth from me, you put me in an impossible position. You made me complicit in your deception without my knowledge or consent." "I know," Elena whispered, "and I will regret that for the rest of my life." "Edmund, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need you to know that loving you and being your wife, even under false pretenses, was the most genuine and meaningful experience of my life. Whatever happens to me now, I will always be grateful for the time we had together." Edmund felt tears forming in his own eyes as he listened to her words. Despite everything she had done, despite the magnitude of her deception, he found that his feelings for her had not simply disappeared. The woman he had loved was sitting right in front of him, and learning about her lies hadn't erased the memories of their happiness together or the depth of their connection. "What do you want from me, Elena?" he asked quietly. "What outcome are you hoping for?" "I want you to be able to move forward with your life and your reign without this scandal destroying everything you've worked for," she replied. I want your children to be able to remember me fondly rather than with hatred or disgust. And selfishly, I want you to remember that what we had together was real, even if it was built on a foundation of lies. The conversation continued for another hour, covering the practical details of what would happen next and the emotional reality of ending a marriage that, despite its fraudulent beginnings, had become meaningful to both of them. As Edmund walked back to his study afterward, he realized that the most difficult part of this entire crisis wasn't dealing with the security implications or the public relations challenge. It was accepting that he could simultaneously love someone and lose all trust in them. Part 4. The decision of how to handle Elena's fate weighed heavily on Edmund's mind as he prepared to address the nation. The past week had been a whirlwind of meetings with security officials, legal experts, and senior government ministers, all working to develop a strategy that would protect both national security and the integrity of the monarchy. The complexity of the situation had grown even more challenging when intelligence services revealed additional information about the international network that had recruited Elena and the potential ongoing threats to Astoria. In his private study, Edmund reviewed the final draft of the statement that would be broadcast to the nation in just a few hours. The communications team had crafted language that would acknowledge the end of his marriage while protecting Elena from immediate physical danger and preserving some dignity for the royal family. However, Edmund knew that no amount of careful wordsmithing could completely shield him or the monarchy from the scandal that was about to unfold. Lord Ashworth entered the study carrying a secure phone and wearing an expression that Edmund had learned meant either very good news or very bad news. Your Majesty, I've just received a call from the Director of Intelligence Services. Elena has provided them with detailed information about her recruitment, training, and the identity of her handlers. This intelligence has led to the discovery of a much larger espionage network operating within Astoria. Edmund looked up from his papers, surprised by this development. She's cooperating with the investigation? Apparently, she approached the security team yesterday morning and requested to speak with investigators. She's provided names, locations, communication methods, and details about other individuals who may have been recruited by the same organization. So, for instance, the intelligence services believe this information could be invaluable in protecting national security going forward. This revelation added yet another layer of complexity to Edmund's decision-making process. If Elena was genuinely committed to helping expose the espionage network that had recruited her, it suggested that her claims about developing genuine loyalty to Astoria during their marriage might be true. It also meant that her cooperation could be crucial for preventing future security breaches. What are the intelligence services recommending regarding Elena's status? Edmund asked. They're suggesting that her cooperation be taken into consideration when determining her fate, Your Majesty. While her actions during the early period of your marriage were clearly treasonous, her decision to stop providing intelligence and her current cooperation with authorities demonstrate a change in her loyalties. They believe that prosecuting her to the full extent of the law might actually be counterproductive from a security standpoint. Edmund set down the draft statement and walked to the window, a habit he had developed during times of intense stress. The autumn weather had given way to the first snow of winter, and the royal gardens were covered in a pristine white blanket that reminded him of the early days of his relationship with Elena, when they had walked together through the first snowfall of their courtship. William, I need your honest opinion about something, Edmund said without turning from the window. Do you believe that Elena's feelings for me and for this country became genuine during our marriage? Lord Ashworth was quiet for several moments before responding. Your Majesty, based on my observations over the past 5 years and the intelligence gathered during this investigation, I believe that Elena's emotional transformation was authentic. Her behavior during state functions, her dedication to her charitable work, her interactions with your children, and her obvious distress during recent conversations all suggest that she developed genuine affection for you and loyalty to Astoria. But does that matter? Edmund asked, finally turning back to face his advisor. Does the authenticity of her later feelings excuse the magnitude of her initial deception? That's not for me to judge, Your Majesty. That's a decision you must make both as a king considering national security and as a man considering his own emotional well-being. Edmund nodded, understanding that the final decision would ultimately rest with him alone. He thought about his children, who had grown to love Elena despite their initial reservations about their father's remarriage. Prince Alexander had frequently praised Elena's intelligence and her genuine interest in his studies and career plans. Princess Victoria had confided in Elena about relationships and personal struggles that she felt uncomfortable discussing with her father. How would they handle learning that their stepmother had been living a lie? "How much time do we have before the press breaks the story?" Edmund asked. "Perhaps 12 to 18 hours, Your Majesty. Several major news outlets have contacted the Royal Press Office with questions that suggest they have significant information about the investigation." Edmund made his decision. "Schedule a meeting with Elena for this afternoon. I want to discuss the terms of her cooperation with intelligence services and the conditions under which this marriage will be dissolved. Then schedule a cabinet meeting for this evening to finalize our public response." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Should I inform Elena of the general nature of the discussion?" "Tell her that her fate has not yet been determined, but that her cooperation with authorities is being taken into consideration. And William, I want her to understand that this conversation will likely be our last private meeting as husband and wife." Several hours later, Elena entered the study where they had shared so many conversations during their marriage. She moved hesitantly, clearly uncertain about what to expect from this final meeting. Edmund had spent the intervening time reviewing intelligence reports about her cooperation and consulting with legal experts about the various options for resolving their marriage and her legal status. "Elena," Edmund began, gesturing for her to take her usual chair near the fireplace. "I understand that you've been working with our security services to provide information about the organization that recruited you." "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but subdued. "I've told them everything I know about my recruitment, my training, my handlers, and the other individuals I encountered who may have been involved in similar operations. I realize it doesn't undo what I've done, but I hope it can help protect Astoria from future threats." Edmund studied her face, noting the exhaustion and stress of the past week, but also seeing something that might have been relief. "Why did you decide to cooperate? You could have remained silent and forced the investigation to proceed without your assistance." Quote, "Because I love this country, Edmund. I know that sounds impossible to believe given what I've done, but it's true. Living here as your wife, working with the charitable organizations, meeting the people of Astoria, it all became real to me. This became my home, and these became my people. I can't undo the damage I caused in the beginning, but I can try to prevent future damage." Edmund felt a familiar conflict between his anger at her deception and his admiration for what appeared to be genuine growth and redemption. "The intelligence services have informed me that your cooperation has been extremely valuable. Based on the information you've provided, they believe they can dismantle a significant portion of the espionage network that operated against our nation." Elena's eyes showed a flicker of hope. "Does that mean there might be alternatives to a full criminal prosecution?" "That depends on several factors," Edmund replied carefully. "Your continued cooperation with authorities, your willingness to accept certain restrictions on your freedom and activities, and your agreement to the dissolution of our marriage under specific terms." "What kind of restrictions are you considering?" Elena asked. Edmund consulted the notes that Lord Ashworth had prepared for him. "You would be required to remain in Astoria under intelligence service supervision for at least 2 years to ensure your continued cooperation and to protect you from potential retaliation by your former handlers. Your communications would be monitored, your travel would be restricted, and your activities would be subject to approval by security authorities. Additionally, you would be stripped of your royal title and all privileges associated with your position as queen." Elena nodded slowly, clearly understanding that these restrictions, while severe, were preferable to a criminal trial that could result in decades in prison. "And our marriage?" "The marriage will be annulled," Edmund said, his voice becoming more formal and distant. "Legally, it will be treated as if it never existed. You will have no claim to royal property or privileges, and you will have no ongoing relationship with the royal family after the dissolution is complete." The pain that crossed Elena's face at these words was unmistakable, and Edmund felt his own heart ache as he delivered what he knew would be devastating news to her. Despite everything that had happened, ending their marriage remained one of the most difficult decisions he had ever made. "I understand," Elena said quietly. "Edmund, I know I have no right to ask this, but may I write letters to Alexander and Victoria explaining my situation? I don't want them to remember me with hatred or to feel that their affection for me was misplaced." Edmund considered this request carefully. His children would indeed be devastated by the revelation of Elena's true background, and they deserved some explanation that would help them process their feelings about their stepmother. "You may write the letters, but they will be reviewed by security services before delivery," he replied. "And Elena, any future contact with my children will require my explicit permission and will be subject to the restrictions I mentioned earlier." Elena nodded, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "Thank you, Edmund, for everything. For giving me the chance to experience genuine love and to be part of a real family, even if it couldn't last. And for finding a way to handle this situation that doesn't destroy me completely." Edmund felt his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him as he looked at the woman who had been both his greatest joy and his greatest betrayal. "Elena, I need you to understand that while I believe your feelings for me became genuine, I can never trust you again. What we had together was real, but it was also built on a foundation that can never be repaired." "I know," she whispered, "and I will carry the regret of that for the rest of my life." As Elena prepared to leave the study for the final time as his wife, Edmund made one last decision that surprised even himself. "Elena, when your period of supervision is complete, and if you choose to remain in Astoria, you will be granted citizenship and a modest pension that will allow you to live quietly and comfortably. You made terrible mistakes, but you also tried to make amends, and I believe you deserve a chance to build a new life." The gratitude in Elena's eyes was overwhelming, and for a moment Edmund saw clearly the woman he had fallen in love with, the person she had become during their years together, despite the lies that had brought them together initially. "Thank you, Edmund," she said simply. "I promise you that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this second chance." Part 5. The royal broadcast was scheduled for 8 o'clock in the evening, giving Edmund just enough time to meet with his children and prepare them for the shocking revelations that would soon become public knowledge. Prince Alexander and Princess Victoria had been summoned to the palace from their respective universities, told only that their father needed to discuss an urgent family matter with them before making a significant announcement to the nation. Edmund found his children waiting in the family sitting room, a comfortable space filled with photographs from their childhood and mementos from family holidays. Alexander, now 26 and completing his graduate studies in international relations, had his mother's serious demeanor and thoughtful eyes. Victoria, 23 and studying art history, possessed Isabella's warm smile and expressive nature. Both young adults looked concerned but patient as their father entered the room. "Father," Alexander said, standing to embrace Edmund, "Lord Ashworth mentioned that you needed to speak with us before some kind of public announcement. Is everything all right? Are you ill?" Edmund gestured for his children to sit down, taking his place in the chair that had been Isabella's favorite during her lifetime. The irony of choosing that particular seat for this conversation was not lost on him, as he prepared to tell them about the end of his second marriage from the place where his first wife had shared so many intimate family discussions. "I need to tell you both something that will be difficult to hear and even more difficult to understand," Edmund began, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil he felt. "Catherine is not who we believed her to be. Her real name is Elena Vasquez. She was born in Moldavia, and she initially approached our family as part of an espionage operation directed against the crown and the government." The silence that followed this announcement was deafening. Edmund watched as his children processed information that seemed impossible to believe. Victoria's face went pale, while Alexander's expression shifted from confusion to anger to disbelief in a matter of seconds. "What do you mean she approached us as part of an espionage operation?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you saying that Catherine has been lying to us for 5 years?" "Yes," Edmund replied gently. "Elena created a completely false identity and background in order to gain access to our family and to gather intelligence for a foreign organization. She was recruited and trained specifically for this purpose before she ever met any of us." Alexander stood abruptly and began pacing the room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "So everything we knew about her was a lie? Her education, her background, her previous work, all of it was fabricated?" "The basic biographical information was fabricated, yes. However," Edmund paused, choosing his words carefully, "I believe that her feelings for our family became genuine during the course of her time with us. The security investigation suggests that she stopped providing information to her handlers several years ago, and she has been cooperating fully with authorities to help expose the espionage network that recruited her. Victoria looked up at her father with tears in her eyes. But how do we know what was real and what was performance? All those conversations I had with her about university, about relationships, about mother's death, was she just gathering information about us the entire time? This was the question that Edmund had been dreading, because he wasn't entirely certain of the answer himself. Based on my conversations with Elena over the past week and the assessment of intelligence professionals who have been observing her behavior, I believe that most of her interactions with you both were genuine expressions of affection and concern. The person who worried about your studies, who celebrated your achievements, who comforted you during difficult times. I believe that was the real Elena, not part of her assignment.
How can you possibly believe that, Father?
Alexander demanded, his voice rising with emotion. She systematically deceived all of us for years. She violated every trust we placed in her, and she put our entire family at risk. How can you defend her actions in any way? Edmund understood his son's anger, recognizing it as a mirror of his own initial reaction to Elena's revelations. I'm not defending her actions, Alexander. What she did was inexcusable and has caused immeasurable damage to our family and potentially to our nation. But I've learned over the past week that the situation is more complex than a simple case of espionage and betrayal. He went on to explain Elena's background, her family's desperate circumstances, her recruitment by individuals who exploited her vulnerability, and her gradual transformation during their marriage. He described her cooperation with intelligence services and her apparent genuine remorse for the damage she had caused. What's going to happen to her? Victoria asked, her artistic sensibility perhaps making her more receptive to the nuanced emotional reality of Elena's situation. The marriage will be annulled, and Elena will be stripped of her royal title, Edmund explained. She will remain under intelligence service supervision for at least 2 years while continuing to cooperate with their investigation. After that period, if she chooses to remain in Astoria, she will be granted citizenship and allowed to build a new life under her real identity. You're not having her prosecuted for treason? Alexander asked, his tone suggesting he felt this was insufficient punishment for Elena's crimes. The intelligence services have recommended against a full criminal prosecution, primarily because her cooperation has been so valuable in exposing the broader espionage network. Additionally, a public trial would likely cause even more damage to the monarchy and to national security by revealing operational details that are better kept classified. Edmund could see that his children were struggling to reconcile their anger at Elena's deception with their genuine affection for the woman they had known as Catherine. This internal conflict was something he understood intimately, as he had been wrestling with the same emotional complexity since learning the truth about his wife's background. She asked permission to write letters to both of you, explaining her situation and expressing her feelings about your relationship, Edmund continued. These letters will be reviewed by security services before delivery, and any future contact with Elena will require my approval and will be subject to significant restrictions. Victoria wiped away tears as she considered this information. I don't know how I feel about receiving a letter from her. Part of me wants to understand her perspective, but part of me feels like anything she says will just be more manipulation. That's a decision you'll need to make for yourselves, Edmund replied. I won't pressure either of you to maintain any relationship with Elena, nor will I prevent you from seeking closure if that's what you need. Alexander finally sat back down, his anger seeming to give way to exhaustion and sadness. Father, how do we move forward from this? How does the monarchy survive a scandal of this magnitude? We move forward by being honest with the people of Astoria about what happened, by demonstrating that we've learned from this experience and taken steps to prevent it from happening again, and by continuing to serve the nation with integrity and dedication, Edmund replied. The monarchy has survived wars, economic crises, and personal scandals throughout its history. We'll survive this as well, but it will require all of us to recommit ourselves to the principles and values that make the crown worthy of the people's trust. As the time for the broadcast approached, Edmund met with his communications team for final preparations. The statement had been carefully crafted to acknowledge the end of his marriage, while protecting both Elena's safety and the monarchy's reputation. The challenge was providing enough information to satisfy public curiosity while avoiding details that could compromise ongoing intelligence operations or unnecessarily inflame public anger. At precisely 8 o'clock, Edmund sat in the formal study that served as the setting for official royal broadcasts, facing cameras that would carry his words to millions of Astorian citizens and viewers around the world. He wore his most formal military uniform, a choice designed to emphasize the gravity of the situation and his role as the nation's leader during a time of crisis. "My fellow Astorians," he began, his voice carrying the weight of his 30 years as monarch. "I speak to you tonight about a matter of profound personal and national importance. After careful consideration and extensive consultation with security and legal experts, I have decided to dissolve my marriage to Queen Catherine, effective immediately." He went on to explain that security investigations had revealed inconsistencies in Catherine's background that made it impossible for the marriage to continue. He acknowledged that the situation had caused him great personal pain, but emphasized that the security and integrity of the nation had to take precedence over any individual considerations, including his own. "The person you have known as Queen Catherine has cooperated fully with authorities to address the security concerns that necessitated this action," Edmund continued. "While I cannot discuss the details of ongoing investigations, I can assure you that appropriate measures have been taken to protect our nation's interests, and that this situation does not reflect any ongoing threat to Astoria or its people." Edmund concluded his statement by reaffirming his commitment to serving as monarch and his confidence in the strength and resilience of the Astorian people. He acknowledged that the dissolution of his marriage would raise many questions and concerns, but he asked for the public's patience and trust as the royal family and the government worked through the complex implications of this situation. As the cameras stopped rolling and the broadcast ended, Edmund felt a profound sense of both relief and loss. The most difficult chapter of his reign had been officially acknowledged, but the process of rebuilding trust and moving forward would take years. He thought about Elena, who was watching the broadcast from her secure quarters, knowing that her life as Queen of Astoria had officially ended and her future remained uncertain. The immediate response to the broadcast was intense but more supportive than Edmund had feared. While many citizens expressed shock and disappointment about the Queen's deception, there was also widespread admiration for Edmund's handling of an impossible situation and for his decision to prioritize national security over personal considerations. In the weeks that followed, details of Elena's cooperation with intelligence services gradually became public knowledge, leading to the arrest of several individuals involved in the espionage network and significant improvements in Astoria's counterintelligence capabilities. Elena herself remained largely out of public view, beginning the process of building a new identity and life under the supervision of security services. Edmund never saw Elena again after their final conversation in his study, though he occasionally received reports about her progress from intelligence officials. He learned that she had started working with refugee assistance organizations, using her language skills and understanding of displacement to help others who had lost their identities and were trying to build new lives. It seemed appropriate that someone who had experienced the complexity of living with multiple identities would find purpose in helping others navigate similar challenges. The monarchy survived the scandal, as Edmund had predicted, though it took several years for public trust to be fully restored. Alexander and Victoria both declined to read the letters Elena had written to them, choosing instead to focus on their own lives and careers while gradually coming to terms with the complex legacy of their relationship with their former stepmother. Edmund never remarried, finding that the experience with Elena had left him both wiser about human nature and more cautious about placing his trust in others. He channeled his energy into his royal duties and into rebuilding the reputation of the monarchy through dedicated public service and transparent governance. Years later, when historians wrote about Edmund's reign, they noted that the dissolution of his second marriage, while personally devastating, had ultimately strengthened both the monarch and the institution of the monarchy by demonstrating that even the royal family was subject to the law and accountable for their actions. The scandal became a testament to the resilience of democratic institutions and the importance of placing national interests above personal considerations, even at the highest levels of government. This work is entirely fictional, and any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental.